Go. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the first installment of our Pranic approach to meditation series. My name is Derek, and when we bring up the notion or idea of prana, it may or may not be a familiar concept. And even if we have heard the Sanskrit word prana, we may have a kind of generic understanding as to what that means, or perhaps not have, kind of like an intimate or a visceral feel as to the entity of prana, and perhaps even much less so how to engage it or direct it or work with it in relationship to yoga practice and at large in relationship to life. So it's not a conventional idea, this notion of prana. Rather, it falls outside of our typical understanding of how life and creation is put together. You might say it falls out of the normative reality. And normative reality looks something like CNN, looks something like Fox News, looks something like McDonald's, looks something like, quote, conventional food, though it's actually the exception. For the longest period of time, all food was organic, but then it became other. Organic became other. So these are examples of the kind of normative understanding or normative reality. And what we're after through the pursuit of yoga is something unnormal, or normal as I've defined it by those examples. Pursuit of yoga is to recognize or come in contact with something that is not defined by the normative standard, that by the normative standard is quite exceptional. In fact, so exceptional that it doesn't exist. It's not possible. It's not part of our conventional worldview, and therefore is negated. And in pursuing yoga, in pursuing an intimate relationship to prana, it's helpful. Like point of departure, leaving the harbor, it's helpful to create greater allowance in our understanding of ourselves and of life that allows for more mystery, that allows for not knowing, that allows for developing a relationship to the unseen, developing a relationship to principles or even entities that fall outside of the domain of our five senses or the confines of what we've been taught or has been reinforced for us, what's real beyond the confines of strictly a material interpretation of what life is and how it operates and what's possible, and to say it again, what's real, right? What's not defined as real is often thrown under the bus of heresy or crazy or woo-woo or not real, and is largely dismissed. And where we're pursuing is an unconventional understanding. And if we can hold inside of ourselves a sense of wonder or mystery that allows for things that are, again, not defined by our five senses or the normative reality, we can start to tease apart and discover something exceptional. Discover something that's much more, principally, much more subtle than the manifest material world. And the proposition in yoga, as it relates to prana, is that there's a kind of preceding energetic current that not only pervades material manifestation, but also inhabits subtler dimensions or realms. So typically we know material manifestation as in 3 dimensions. So this is another way we can conceptualize this. Material manifestation consists of 3 dimensions: length, height, and width. And that's it. That's all you get. That's all that's real. That's all that exists. And perhaps on a good day, you may hear someone allude to time being a 4th dimension. That all this length, height, and width is held in this dimension called time. Now we're starting to get kind of like, what is time? Wow, what a mysterious substance time is. How ubiquitous it is time, all pervasive, time and space. Wow. So now the equation has got more, sort of has a mystical tone to it. And the proposition in yoga is that there's actually further and further other dimensions. I don't know, I couldn't put an exact number, but let's say there's 8 dimensions. Like, holy smoke, right? Unfathomable, right? Our normative understanding of our 5 senses as to how life is constituted is completely blown apart at that point. So how do you, account for those dimensions? One way that we can begin to approach them or relate to them, or to see the greater totality of what constitutes reality, right, as opposed to this finite box that we bump around in with relative degrees of satisfaction, fulfillment, and certain degrees of suffering and disappointment. How do we train our awareness to perceive life more universally, right? As more accurately, right? To have a more complete perspective that is more, that makes our relationships more wholesome, our relationship with ourselves more wholesome. We can see ourselves more completely or fully. And what's more, we can affect positive change in a more direct and deliberate way, right? That we actually have some, and this is where we start to lean into this idea of prana. That prana is a subtler force by which we can actualize change, not only in the subtle realm, but in our material existence. That prana is the agency by which we can expand beyond our current or normative understanding, and to appreciate the depth of life and come out of the confines of our own suffering, essentially. So that's the importance or role that prana plays in the evolutionary process of yoga. one more point I want to make here, and that's and that is to deconstruct a bit what we actually mean by this principle of prana. What are we talking about from a yogic perspective, right? We're willing to step into yoga, and within the yoga context, what does prana mean? And let's begin. And I've kind of pulled this understanding together from a couple of reliable sources that more or less parallel one another in their message. David Frowley and Baba Haridas. And principle, the what I want to begin with is that prana is ubiquitous. It's omnipresent. This subtle life force current exists throughout the creation, both subtle, both seen and unseen. And this subtle current occurs as molded by the three gunas, if you're familiar with that principle, occurs in varying degrees of density or varying degrees of lightness and vitality, or more active or alive, what we call alive. And, an example of dense prana might look something like a rock, or not quite as dense, a tree. Tree still is pretty slow, though beautiful in its own right. Or a sentient creature is more infused, such as a squirrel or a rabbit, or I got to pet a horse yesterday that had prana. It was eating the prana of the grass. And or the human being. The human being. And we can, and so the human being, I want to paint broad strokes at this point, and then we'll get into the details of how it relates to your mind and awareness and these sorts of things. But I'll say that ways that we most directly relate to prana, or can actualize prana, is through our mind, through the sun. So the sun is like this pranic emitting force that brings forth life. It's incredible. Just shines across infinite amount of space, strikes the earth, and lo and behold, a plant emerges. And the whole ecology that's set into motion from there. And most directly, this is where we principally relate to prana, through the air or through the breath. Little distinction here. So we could think of prana as the essence, the life-giving, visible power that pervades oxygen. Okay, and that's in this series, that's largely how we'll relate to this principle of prana, right? By manipulating or changing our breath, or pranayama, breathing practices. All right, my dear yoga friends, there's much more that we'll unpack through the layers of this presentation, and more importantly, in your own experience, in your own embodied experience. That's ultimately what we're really after here throughout the series, okay? So, more theoretical backdrop to what we're doing.